Hello, everyone. This is Patrick Curry for my final presentation for the Summer 2012 class, Music of the Romantic Era. Today we are going to be talking about the middle class, the rise of the middle class, and its impact on music in the Romantic Era. You'll have to excuse me, the room that I am videotaping this in has a time-sensitive light, so if I walk around or move around a little bit more than usual, just please bear with me. Just trying to keep it so that it suddenly doesn't become a ghost story. Let us begin. To get a firm idea of the rise of the middle class and its impact on the Romantic era, we first have to have an idea of what was taking place prior to the era, namely looking at the classical era and the late 18th century and how that transitions into the 19th century. In the 18th century, we have essentially two social classes, and there is a very strong division between these two. We have the upper class and the lower class. The upper class is composed almost exclusively by the aristocracy, rulers, government officials, wealthy landowners, essentially anyone that has some sense of entitlement and some history of that entitlement. The lower class is essentially comprised of everybody else, commoners, people who work for a living, anyone who was not born into an aristocratic family. This has caused an entitlement of the upper class. Where your social status determined your opportunities during the 18th century, the upper class felt that it was deserved, that the upper class deserved more than the lower class did. They felt that their opportunities should be greater than the lower class. This included things such as education, with the nobility and upper class frankly being the only educated members of society at this time other than the clergy. And also entertainment, things such as music and theater were created and almost exclusively performed for members of the upper class. At this point in time, there were really no public concerts because, one, the aristocracy would not allow it, and two, because the common man could not afford the amount of money and the luxury that it would take to go to a public performance. During this time period, we have the concept of government by divine right, in which kings and the members of the aristocracy felt that their right to rule was determined by God and or their family lineage, that they have always been in power and therefore should remain in power. We also still have a very strong power of the church in this time period, which the clergy still maintained quite a strong hold on facets of society. How this fit into music, classic music of the 18th century. Due to the fact that music was an exclusive art form for the upper class, the main style of music at that time was court music, done through the patronage of composers for the aristocracy. Examples of this would be Joseph Haydn's compositions for the Esterhazy court, Mozart and the work that he did with the royal court for Salzburg. We have Beethoven, whose patron was, or one of his patrons was King Leopold, and compositions being paid for and by the aristocracy and therefore performed exclusively for the aristocracy. We have grand opera at this time, mainly headed by Mozart, in which elaborate settings, elaborate costumes, very expensive performances that only the aristocracy could afford to not only finance but also view and attend. Because of this, these musical topics of opera and the styles in which composers were able to perform in were quite limited. You could not necessarily write an opera that spoke of revolution, was about the rising up of the common man to overthrow aristocracies, to create equality between these groups of people. Styles had to fit what the aristocracy wanted, what they wanted to listen to, what they enjoyed. And the music of this time was specifically written to be performed and played in grand venues, such as royal palaces, large courts in front of the entirety of a court, a royal court. Examples would be like the Palace of Versailles in France, the royal palaces in Austria for the Esterhazy court, so on and so forth. There was a number of things that did eventually happen in Europe and across the world during the 18th century that led to the creation of a middle class. This really started with revolutions around the end of the century in the late 1700s. We had in America the American Revolution against the British in the 1770s. That led to the independence of the Americas. We also had in the 1790s the French Revolution in Europe, which created widespread social and political upheaval in the European nations at this time. We also then eventually, as time continues into the 1800s and the 19th century, the starting and ending of the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars were a continuation and outgrowth of the French Revolution, in which Napoleon and his French army essentially conquered a great portion of Europe, and there was just constant warfare. The ending of the Napoleonic Wars and the defeat and consequent exile of Napoleon caused a great redistribution of power within Europe. Borders of countries were completely redrawn, and it created the rise of other empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire would be rising into power. The Holy Roman Empire had fallen at this point, and it would create the Germanic Empire, the British empires of the 1800s. And the emergence of these British and Germanic empires led to widespread colonization of the world from European nations. Colonization spread into Africa, namely through the Germanic empires, Asia with the British, South America with a number of nations, and then eventually also Oceania and the South Pacific islands around Australia. What this did was it opened trade routes across the world and created capitalism in European countries. This open trade routes not only led to a spread of culture between these world cultures and European cultures, but the increase in capitalism also provided opportunities for the members of the lower class to make more money, to prosper, to have more opportunities to really make a name for themselves and create a comfortable living situation. Another of events in the early 1800s that led to the creation of the middle class was the opening of universities and conservatories. Universities and conservatories allowed for the first time higher education beyond basic grammar schooling or anything like that to be available to the public. Education was no longer solely the right of the upper class. Conservatories allowed people from lower classes to go ahead and study music in a formal setting instead of through the master and apprentice situation that had been occurring before. One of the largest things that led to the creation of the middle class was the Industrial Revolution, in which technology and a boom in business gave the middle class, again, more opportunities to improve their quality of life, more opportunities to take different jobs and allowing them more income, more time on their hands from not having to work incredibly long, labor-intensive jobs, and just generally creating more opportunities for everyone. One of the things that we'll focus on and that will help create the relationship between the middle class and Romantic music is a period in Germany called the Biedermeier period. As I just said, this occurred in Germany, and the time period is considered between 1815 and 1848. And the Biedermeier period is a description of art, architecture, and a social phenomena that resulted in the center of social life to be the family. It led to a far more private family life than the social life and the socialite life that the 18th century so enjoyed. This mainly resulted from the tightening of the Austrian government. Because the French revolutions took place, the Austrian governments became very nervous that something similar could happen in Austria. And so they started to become very strict on the ability for people to gather in public forums. This included closing down clubs, closing down meeting halls, basically disallowing any kind of large-scale public gathering of the lower class. What this caused was the home life, your private life, to become far more important. Your social contacts and interactions suddenly became limited to your immediate family and then small personal groups of friends. Once this occurred, and because during the Biedermeier period, things like the Industrial Revolution and the colonization and increase in capitalism allowed the middle class to be making more money, there was kind of a keeping up with the Joneses mentality that that this new and burgeoning middle class began to embrace, in which members of the middle class were constantly striving to emulate the aristocracy, kind of feel as though they were making it, and like I just said, keeping up with the Joneses. This had quite a bit of impact on music. Who was important, what was important, why was it important? During the Biedermeier period, parlor music became very, very popular. This resulted from the middle class suddenly having the type of income to be able to own pianos inside of their home. This meant that members of the middle class were more inclined to learn how to sing and how to play piano. Musical performances within the home were suddenly now the new form of entertainment and recreation for families in this time period. And because of this, we have members of the middle class wanting to learn music and therefore calling for compositions by composers at this period in time to be more playable by moderately trained musicians or amateur musicians, not necessarily experts. This is all kind of a precursor to what later on in the 20th century composers like Hindemith would be doing with their kind of gosh, my German is terrible, so forgive me if I massacre this, Gebrauchsmusik, in which Hindemith was creating music for the sake of being performed and music that was functional for people to play of really varying levels of musical talent. The ownership of pianos and the popularity of parlor music meant that there was it meant that these gatherings of your close family and friends within your home, combined with the fact that musical performances within your home were now the favored type of entertainment, there were performances for small groups. This led to the concept of the salons, in which you had small gatherings of groups coming together and having performances for each other. Things like the Schubertiads, in which Schubert and his friends would get together and have salon-esque performances and a general sharing of poetry, music, etc. Speaking of Schubert, during this time period and the popularity of German Lied and piano literature became far more important and far more popular. This included composers such as Schubert, Schumann in their Lied as well as their piano works, Chopin in his piano compositions, specifically his dance compositions, like Dr. Goranson spoke about in the 19th century piano literature lecture. The polonaises and marzoukas, basically all these dance type of things that would be performed in your home so that your friends and family could dance along to. Composers like Schubert, especially where Schubert's main compositional output occurred in Germany/Austria during the Biedermeier period, he became a very central figure in the historical study of this time period, and his music is kind of considered the quintessential Biedermeier period compositional style. Another effect was that there was a greater desire for public concerts. I apologize that the size of the text in this PowerPoint slide are a bit small, but instead of cluttering things up with more and more and more slides, I figured that I would just try to squeeze the last little bit onto one. But there was a greater desire for public concerts for the middle class. There was, again, far more expendable income and leisure time, and with this striving to emulate the aristocracy, the middle class wanted to go to public concerts. They wanted to go and see symphonies performed. They wanted to go and see opera. This led to a growth in concerts. According to this wonderful text right here, Music in the Middle Class by William Weber, he outlines the growth in concerts in London, Vienna, and Paris during this time period. Between 1827 and 1845, the number of public concerts in London grew by 305%, in Paris by 491%, and in Vienna 47%. Now, I know the numbers in Vienna don't necessarily seem as impressive, but considering any growth in a public concert is going to be good for the middle class, even a number like 47% is very important. We also have the expansion of the orchestra to fit this bigger is better model that was sought after by the middle class. They wanted, again, like the aristocracy, to have the biggest and the best things. And because in public venues there was more opportunity for larger groups to perform, the orchestra has to expand in order to fill out this space. For example, you look at the late symphonies of Beethoven, the orchestral works of Berlioz, eventually later on in the 19th century, the operatic works of Wagner, and just this general expansion of the size of groups, the scale of works as the Romantic period continues on. Also during this time period we have the foundation of orchestras. In 1842 we not only have the New York Philharmonic here in America, the first symphony founded in America, we also have the foundation of the Vienna Orchestra. In 1855 the Strasbourg Philharmonic. Later in the century, the Dresden Philharmonic Orchestra in 1870, the Boston Symphony Orchestra in 1881, and the Berlin Philharmoniker in 1887. This foundation of orchestras, again, just expanded the ability for public concerts to occur for the middle class. This also gives rise to the popularity of virtuoso performers. You have performers such as Paganini and Franz Liszt able to tour Europe and perform at various public concerts for a very appreciative audience, an audience of middle class members who respect musical talent and respect virtuosity because they've never seen anything like that before. This also led to the widespread popularity of Chopin and his works, as well as other virtuoso performers of the time. So in general, and to kind of wrap things up, the middle class really grew out of revolution in Europe and just a shift in social conscious from, you know, certain people having the right to things and spreading that into everyone having the right to an education, the right to enjoy musical performances. Impacts on music included not only compositional changes and a change in the styles of music that were more popular, like German lied and small chamber groups, but also just led to music becoming more widespread around the world. More people being exposed to aesthetic and having the opportunities for more composers to have their works heard, to have their works spread around Europe and the rest of the world, and to really just expand our knowledge on what was possible, what was available, and I feel like I'm rambling at this point. But that is the information I have for you on Romantic music and the middle class. I wanted to thank you all for taking the time to view this video and listen to me ramble at you for about 25 minutes or so. I very much enjoyed doing the research and putting together this presentation, and I hope that you enjoyed the information that I have found and compiled as much as I did. To those of you who are working on your videos currently, which, given that they are due in about 2 days, I hope everyone's on top of. I hope you have as easy a time as I have had, and that you enjoy the experience. It is, like Dr. Goranson said, certainly not as easy as it looks. Thank you all very much for observing. You'll see that during this thank you, the bibliography for my presentation should be, if I did this technology thing right, should be displayed. All right, and again, thank you all very much, and you all have a pleasant evening.